Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Penderbury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you are. Can you believe it? After the months of preparation and the months of fantasy football, we're down to a final 5 weeks in your AFL fantasy season. And as the final rankings push approaches and you start to get into your league ranks, there is still a ton of stuff we need to talk about on this week's AFL Fantasy Strategy Roundtable episode. I want to talk about trade out options for you for those that do have some injured stars. We want to look at the fixtures, about those that are hot, those that are not, and what can we learn from the form versus fixture debate and decision-making dilemmas. That coming up on this week's AFL Strategy Roundtable. Joining us on this episode, a man that he made his debut for the Coaches Panel a couple of years ago in the 50 Most Relevant. It took a couple years to get him into the Strategy Roundtable. He made his debut last week. We had to get him back again. One of the co-founders of the AFL Fantasy Fanatics. He and the team with Guesty, Jordox have been doing a power of great work in the AFL fantasy community for now nearly 2 full years. Bails is back on the podcast 2 weeks in a row, mate. Nice to be talking fantasy footy with you. It's clearly the Crows Midas touch. You and I have a podcast. Crows win. Maybe we'll just do this full time now.
Yeah, exactly. Crows finals. Here we come. I think I saw the other day 1% chance when it went with the Crows finals. But now looking forward to chatting fantasy again. It's at that very interesting point of the season. I think one thing we've noticed with this season more than any is that teams are quite unique in terms of what they have been in previous years. Normally, top coaches have maybe got 3, 4, 5 players at most that are different. Whereas this year, I'm seeing teams within top 100. There's probably a good at least 5+. If not, you're looking at 10 to 12. Like half their team is essentially different to a lot of others. So it's going to be making for really interesting sort of in terms of top 100, top 1,000, top 5K, sort of whatever you're aiming for. I think that if you're 200-300 points behind, I still think there is a way you can get to a rank. So like I'm 336 points off top 100. I still think that I've got an outside chance to get there, but 1 or 2 really strong weeks could be the difference. So I guess we'll just have to see how it plays out.
That's that place where you start to look to take some risk, where you go a little bit away from the pack when it comes to the vice captaincy and captain options. You start diverting with your selections along the way. And one of the things that can create that selection diversion is injuries. And while they're never great, and especially when you're on the wrong side of it, what it can do is it creates pathways to trading opportunities. Luxury trades that we are all in right now can be great for us. Or you just need to ask a couple of people where they've lost 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 points, in theory, upgrading their team. Sometimes the injury, especially when it doesn't impact their score in-game, can be a little bit of a blessing in disguise. There's probably 2 positions we want to talk about, Bails, that sit into that injury space. One is a Jordan Dawson. At time of recording, he's in 19% of teams overall. It was much higher 48 hours ago when lockout lifted. But still, pretty much 1 in 5 coaches that are still actively playing fantasy need to look to move him on. And then you've got Koning and Nankervis. Koning of the Tom and Carlton variety is out for the rest of the home and away season, while Nank is out with concussion. Either way, it's a trade. You roll those 2 players up. It's around about 9% of coaches that need to get moving on. Because even if you're like, I'll just get Kruger and have a loop. No, that's not even an option for you. He's out injured as well with a concussion. So let's come back to one of your favorite players, I know, in Jordan Dawson. 19% of coaches are looking at him. A little over 800K. So you can still get some good options, but talk us through a couple of guys. I've got a few on my list, but if you're a Jordan Dawson owner, who are a couple of players you'd be looking to trade into if you had this injury issue of a concussion?
Yeah, so I'm stuck in this boat because I am an owner of Jordan Dawson, and it's a shame because he was over 900K about a month ago, and obviously just a few lower scores just meant, especially that Brisbane game, meant his prices plummeted to 820, I think 823 or something like that, or 825. So it's still a decent price. You don't need too much to go up there. I think that you can go to a number of different areas. So like even in my own team, I'm actually looking at putting Dacos in the mids and getting a Harry Sheasel. I think that could be a pathway where you look at, if you don't have a Sheasel, if you don't have one of the big four forwards, you could look at maybe doing a bit of DPP. But if you're looking at mids, I'd love to say Taranto, because his run coming up for the last 5 weeks looks very, very nice. I know that's why you were trading into a Taranto there. I don't know if I could recommend him off a concussion, though. That's the hard thing with him. I do like Walsh. I know a lot of people are probably not of the same opinion because he's dropped 3 under 100, but after Port, his last 4 games are very, very good there. But in terms of players, it's funny because all the midfield targets I want have good matchups from next week onwards, not this week, because like Noah Anderson, another one I like with a good 4-week stretch. So it's almost really hard to recommend an individual midfielder unless you don't have like an Errol Goulden would be one. If you don't have him, you might be able to get the cash to go up to him. Like Tom Green, obviously he's been great last 5 weeks. So I think a lot of people jumped on him. I reckon probably the top one I probably recommend would be Jack Steele, which is didn't think we'd be saying that pre-buys. He's obviously looked great the last month. I think he's put 4 scores up over 97. Obviously last week we were 133. So he would arguably be my pick, along with another player that a few people might trade in, maybe Caleb Serong, who's got a good 3 matchups coming up. So they're probably the 2 midfielders that I'd probably like. Steele or Serong for me would be the 2. What about you, MJ? What would you be looking at?
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of really good names that I had on my list. The other 2 that I'd probably put in there is a guy that actually costs you 0 cash. It's identical price point in Luke Davies-Uniacke. They've got Geelong, they've got the Tigers and the Eagles in these next 3. None of those teams really, I could say, would be a tag concern for LDU. Really favourable inside mid matchups, and North are really, really performing quite well at the moment. So you look for a high ceiling guy. He sits there. You mentioned Serong. I think he's a ripping pick. Steele, who would have thought you mentioned him? Adam Treloar's probably, if I was spending over 950K, it'd be him and Goulden that I'd feel the most confidence in getting. Treloar does, coming off 10 days ago, out with that calf concern through there, but 15% owned in the top 100, averaging 111 for the year, 118 his last 3. The only flag I'd put on it, and as you mentioned there with tough matchups, they got Sydney this week, and that's one of the hardest matchups for inside mids. And so Treloar might not be the guy you go to, but to me, geez, he's doing everything right for us at the moment.
Yeah, it's tough because he played so well last week. We know that coaches obviously look at their opposition the week before, and I think Longmire might have seen that game and gone, crap, we might have to stop Treloar. So maybe does the tag go to him? I think Jordan went to him for a period of that game when they played at Marvel early in the year. But then again, we saw Adams tag Lockie Neal. But Sydney are so hard because they've got 3 players that could all tag at any given time. You've got Taylor Adams to do it last week. James Jordan's done it most year, and even a Rowbottom can go head-to-head.
When he comes back,
he's a test this week, so he might be back. But maybe a Rowbottom goes to a Bont. Maybe Adams goes to a Treloar or something, and then maybe Jordan sits on a Bailey Dale. So fair enough, all the Dogs guys could actually be quite well clamped this week. Like even Brisbane, none of them really scored well last week. So I would be nervous trading into a Treloar this week. But after that, I think he could be a pretty solid option if you're looking at next week.
Yeah, I think so too. So let's then talk about the Nankin to Koning option.
Sorry,
go.
I just forgot one thing with Dawson. What are your thoughts on if someone's got a Logan Evans or a Lawson Humphreys and they might be able to do a bit of loot? Because Evans plays on the Friday. If he goes well, you could put maybe a red dot defender on and you can flip Dacos into your mids and hold Dawson, or Humphreys, maybe if it was on your mid bench or defender bench, you might be able to do the same thing. Could you do that? Or do you think this time of the year we're trying to trade these guys out?
I think in principle, the beauty is unless you want to get into a Butters, a Rosie, a Walsh, a Cripps, you're going to give yourself, or a Nick Newman if you want to play some loops, or Houston, you can take a look and see before you make that move. When I look at the Adelaide Crows fixture moving forward, and we'll talk about players that we'll talk about fixtures soon, there's some Crows that if I was an owner of one specific Crow midfielder, I would want to jump off. There's a little hook for you for later in the podcast. That Crows midfield mix for inside mids and the fixture of who they've got coming up against, I want no part of it. Hawthorn's the hardest going around at the moment. They got Port Adelaide at the back of this 5-week stretch. And they've got Sydney as well. So, yeah, I probably
Crouch
would be inclined not to. Who knows?
Might come back.
Yeah, so I'd probably look to move him on almost regardless. But as you've mentioned, use those loophole opportunities that come. A few weeks ago, you remember people were able to do that with a Lawson Humphreys when they played early and around Manor as well when they were looking to cover Heaney. So we do have options to kind of navigate through there. So I like it as a principle. But in terms of, man, I get an 80 from Evans. Am I taking it? Look, probably not.
You probably want like a 9,500 or more, I reckon.
Yeah, I'd almost want 110 plus to feel like I'm net neutral and it's worth holding on to Dawson knowing that fixture. So probably not, but most teams should be able to get a look and see at it, which is positive. So no, it's a good pickup from you, Bails. For the 9% of coaches that have a Koning or a Nankervis out, Nank is a 1 week watch. So maybe you're a Luke Jackson owner and you can loophole through the weekend. So, happy to put that on the table for if you do have the opportunity to look and see. But I think for most coaches, they're going to make that trade. Of the 9% of coaches that are active in AFL fantasy right now with those two, who are you looking to move to into the ruck line, Bails?
Yeah, just with the Luke Jackson thing, don't mind that. West Coast this week, you could do that. But yeah, I think most people are trading. I think that the one is a bit hard to go past is Tristan Cherry. Geelong this week, great matchup. The only thing I would say with Cherry is that if Geelong were ever going to bring Reece Stanley in, I think it's this week. Coming off a loss last week, Cherry is obviously an imposing ruckman, physical ruckman. Geelong will know this. This is a potential banana skin game. Like they don't want to lose 2 in a row after winning a couple in a row. Do they bring Stanley in for a week to go up against a Cherry and sort of do it that way? So that's something I would flag with Cherry, but I still think even regardless, he'll go well. He would probably be my pick, I think. I think Marshall's still a decent pick. I think he's still a top 2 ruck with that ceiling. He can put that ceiling up on any given day, and they haven't named Campbell in a couple of weeks, and Marshall's been playing really well. So I don't think that's an issue. I think Caminiti could either be back this week or next week or he's near. So that's obviously even better that they'll get another bigger forward. English, I probably wouldn't go just because he's got Grundy and Gorn in back-to-back weeks. Probably a bit tricky. And I feel like I'm forgetting one ruckman off the top of my head that I should be mentioning. Grundy got English this week. Maybe you look at it. But I think, Cherry and Marshall are probably the two that stick out for me, I reckon.
I like those. I've got 2, and they're none of the ones you mentioned. So that's awesome. I love that.
I forgot one, and I know I'll let you say it because I know that you're going to say this first.
Kieran Briggs. No. No. I've got 2. One's Max Gawn. Should he come back, he's depending on which pockets of the media listen to, and Simon Goodwin himself said he's playing this week, and now on their injury report, he's listed as a test. So choose who you would like to do that. It's a little bit of coin involved. He's at 961K for you, but really of the next 5 weeks, they've only got one difficult matchup, and that's on the premise that Witts plays for Gold Coast, which he himself is listed for a test. So could you get the number 1 ruck and be unique? One of the reasons you probably went Nankervis and spent big coin was you wanted high ceiling and unique. At that top end of the tree, and even in leagues, chances are Max is pretty unique. So for me, he sits right in that space. And then if you want to roll the dice, I like it. And we talked about this week on the strategy roundtable with Jordox as well. He talked about how important a ceiling player is. And there's a ceiling player that for 2 weeks only would I be interested in. And then you have to get off because this player's final 3 is Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne. And they are 3 mighty tough ruck matchups. I'm talking about Darcy Cameron at 866K playing against a ruckless Richmond this weekend. They already were an easy team to score against in the ruck anyway. And then it's Carlton with Pitternet the week after that. So 2 really nice matchups in good form at the moment. I think he's coming off back-to-back sort of 120s, 130 plus sort of scores for us. The risk for us, Bails, and it's something we'll talk about, I'm sure, throughout this episode is, you want these guys with ceiling, but 2 weeks and then kind of forcing yourself into jumping off before that Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, you are loading the trade dice, aren't you? That, man, if you can't get off him in 2 weeks because of other issues, oh, man, you could be stuck with getting some 70s and 80s in those critical final 3 weeks.
Exactly. I don't mind that Darcy Cameron play. The only flag is what's with Mason Cox. He's not actually on the injury report. That would be my only flag with Darcy Cameron is Mason Cox coming back in. And I guess Collingwood just playing really, really bad at the moment. But then again, that hasn't stopped Darcy Cameron. He's averaging like the better part of 130 points over the last two. Actually, might be over 130 points with that 140 odd. So don't mind it.
There's something I want to talk about, and we kind of alluded to it at the top of the episode. I'm keen on your take about this, and that is we are at this time of the season. And last week we went through our projected using Jaden's stats based off who he projected to be the best for the rest of the year. And there was a midfielder that was in it in Caleb Serong that, based on his form, a lot of the community was understandably so really off him at that period of time. His 5 weeks building into that last week that we've just seen, he was going at 87 as a 5-game average. He had a couple of 90s in there, but nowhere near what he was doing over the first 2 months of the year, where he was basically as safe as houses ton, was pumping up some 130s, 140s. It was, in fact, the first 8 weeks of the year going at 116. And then this massive, bizarre thing happened for people. 5-round fixtures, going at 87, plays Melbourne, comes out and pumps out the best score he's had since round 8, goes a 120 odd across the formats. And it gives us this interesting discussion that I want to have with you. I do have the stats and Serong, and I'll look at that in a sec, but where do we start to let the fixtures and the forecasting of what we think should be the lead driver for a decision to either trade or hold a player, as opposed to their recent score history, which would tell you you should absolutely trade this player? So what becomes the critical eject button or the keep the faith space for you there, Bails? Because last week, depending on who you went to, it could have been a 50, 60 point swing if it went bad. Now, you could have picked up 20 or 30 points too if you got a Treloar. So it still might have been a positive net outcome for people. But what becomes the place for you where you hold versus eject in these critical junctions?
I think my answer is I don't actually know, because when you look at it, there are players that got great matchups that don't put up good scores. There are players that got tough matchup that put up good scores. Like, again, a Serong, 5 games under 100. He plays Melbourne. People have got, Neil Bullen could go to him. And I thought, it was probably going to be him or Jordan Clark, one of those two he'd go to. And it was on like him, Brayshaw and Young were just getting so much of the ball. It didn't matter where Neil Bullen went because they're all sharing it around. So in terms of, I do like targeting fixtures and taking a little bit of account of what they've done, but more about what they've done over the season as a whole, not like the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks. So, for example, like Sam Walsh, I'm looking at targeting next week because he's got Collingwood next week and then he goes on a run of pretty good matchups. But his last 3 have been all under 100 and he's got Port this week. If he goes under 100 again, it's 4 in a row. People are like, oh, geez, am I trading this guy out? A bit like Serong, like 4 weeks, potentially under 100 and then like, what are we doing? But I'm going to be looking at targeting because I think he's got good matchups. So I think it more goes down to what they've done over the whole season.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
And then their fixtures, not maybe necessarily their recent form, unless there's an obvious role change, like a Luke Ryan, for example, or like, well, not role change for Ryan, but the team has changed the way they're scoring. But if a player's had a role change, obviously that's something to look at as well. But if they got the same role that they've been averaging a decent amount over a portion of the season, I think that's still something that you can look into. So that would probably be how some. But as we say, the luck element is there. It's like, who would have thought Dunkley was going to drop a 61? Not a tough matchup, but 61 from Dunkley. Then you get an 88 from Butters, who we thought was going 110, 115 plus, and then you get some. And then Treloar, who, as I said last week,
off a calf,
missed the game off a calf. People trade him out, and we're like, "What's going on?" And he pumps out a 149 with 3 goals. Like it's fantasy's just it's a funny game. It really is.
Yeah. I reckon, and I agree with that too, by the way. I think there's this space of understanding more statistics. Like a couple of years ago, the good friends of ours, and for many in the fantasy footy community, the draft doctors, introduced the statistical tracking and the data point of centre bounce attendances. And now it's become just a part of our normal everyday terminology in the fantasy community where it's not always a core indicator, but we're like, yeah, a player with a high CBA rate, oh, okay, that increases the probability of their likelihood to score. And then others in the community, Rowan's being one of those, introducing market share. And Rid's talked about that a lot throughout the start of the season, about understanding a player's market share of their scoring in contrast to a player's overall and a team's overall scoring. These are new terms. And then I think Jaden, this is our second reference of him on this podcast, but I think he's a leader in this space in a number of different areas. And one of the things he's brought to the community is an understanding of where and how a player scores. So scoring at stoppage versus scoring from or through transition. And the reason I want to bring that up with Serong is he's clear and above the number one scoring player from stoppage, according to his stats by Jaden website. And over round 1 to 8, when we had Serong go at that average of 116, Serong's average of stoppage points was a 67. So plenty of scoring there. But between round 9 and 17, this is where his stoppage points versus difficulty, what he scored. Red matchup, he went 46. Yellow matchup, 64. Yellow matchup against Collingwood, 66. Yellow matchup against Melbourne, 43. Bulldogs, a 49. Then a trio of red matches, 60, 56, and 38 against the Suns, the Swans, and the Tigers. Then last 2 weeks, it started to turn. 64 against the Hawks, a weird match down in Tassie that we've commented on a number of both ours and your podcast channels. We've talked about it. And then this week, 70 points from stoppage against Melbourne. And interestingly, he has a green matchup this week against West Coast, a pretty neutral matchup against Essendon the week after, and then back to another green matchup for Geelong. So for me, this is where I kind of had confidence to keep the faith in Serong, and why we wanted to have this conversation again. It's not for those that traded him to drive the knife and bring the guilt. That's certainly not what the Fanatics or the panel is about doing for people, but rather it's what can we learn from this so that we don't make the future mistake again in 2 weeks' time when we're like, it's luxury trades. I've got a poor guy, as you've mentioned. Walsh is a great illustrator. I expect him to score really poorly against Port. The combination of a sore back and a restrictive inside midfield matchup, I expect him to struggle and get barely a 90. Let's hope it's not the case for owners. But that fixture opens up now and then does indicate trade in. So to me, I think this is this newer understanding of the game of, yeah, form has to be an indicator, but then there's that fixturing and understanding of it. And then ultimately, what do you want to be burnt by? The trading out of a guy and him going 120, or holding a guy that was only chopping around a 90 and dealing with it. So it's never as cut and dry as that. But I think Jaden and others in the community are giving us some new statistical data and information that I think will only help us in future seasons.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's as I said, the good matchup was there for Melbourne, which is just a case of people probably moved because of the tag thing. And we have seen the tags drop a little bit over the last month or so. I think you've got a few teams still running a tag most weeks. Like Giants are still running a tag with Bedford most weeks. You got I'm just trying to think off the top of my head.
Chincotta's still doing something.
Chincotta, yeah. Then you've got Sydney is still running someone. If it's not Jordan, it's an Adams or Rowbottom or whoever they've got running. So there's still a few teams, but like and obviously Graham was out last week, so we don't really know if he comes back in. Does he run a tag? I think he's still another week away, maybe with his injury. But a few teams like Brisbane haven't looked like tagging much, or even a Port haven't tagged as much with a Drew lately. They've just backed in the young guys in the midfield there, and obviously West Coast aren't tagging at the moment with Schofield there and the interim coach. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see sort of if any tags just pop up for a week or two in the back half of the year.
It's a good shout.
I should say.
Yeah. Something we talked about, and I heard you talk about in the round review episode of the Fanatics. You do a live stream that you can go and get pretty much on every social media channel you like. And I want to pick up this thought. It's something we talked about with our Patreons last week in a Q&A episode. We give them if you want to join our Patreon, not too late, all the details in the description of this episode. But we talked a lot about and a bit about F6, and that we've got 4 super forwards this year. It's Caldwell, it's Zorko, it's Heaney, it's Flanders. And then there's this thrower block over probably half a dozen to a dozen names. And it's an interesting space to talk about how we treat F6 straight off the back of a fixture analysis and conversation and learning. So done on purpose. But what's your thoughts about how people are viewing F6? Because any given week we could cop a 60 or a 70 from a guy we're getting at F6. Some weeks more pops and then he doesn't. Other weeks Jackson pops and then he doesn't. Some weeks Mackay pops and then he doesn't. Wood pops and then he doesn't. Some are still rolling a Dowling or a Manor kind of through there and not getting ceiling scores, but not getting basement scores either. And so seeing a lot of coaches look at F6 and using the statistical tools that are available, the DFS Australian go, what are the runs? Who are the fixtures? Who are the opponents? But what's your thoughts about using trade capital on F6? I've got some strong thoughts. I know you do too in this space. Is it worth spending any time trading and getting an improvement on your F6?
I don't think there is, to be honest. I've got Dylan Moore as my fifth forward. I think he's the guy that has got the Crows this week. Played very well against us at the MCG. I had to see that live, unfortunately. So thanks, Crows, for the 2 losses when I went to Melbourne. But Moore's got the ceiling. So he's got the ceiling that he can put up a 120. And if you've got someone else, F6, that goes to 60 and you get a more 120, you're losing out a lot of points. So I think Moore's probably the 5. But in terms of F6 spot, even if we just look at last week, right? If any of those people you've got, so Coach had a Zach Fisher, got a 43 and got a sub out, and now people want to trade him out. You got a Grind Myers who, in a good matchup against the Bulldogs, but the conditions and the ground, he only got a 52. Even an Ollie Dempsey, who a few people still rolling there, only got a 30. Then you had even like a Luke Jackson, only got a 72, obviously with the return of Sean Darcy there. Josh Simpkin only got a 61. If anyone did hold on to a Sexton, he only got a 48. Matt Kennedy only got a 56. Elijah Holland's got a 61 if anyone's got him. Boak was pretty good with a 96, but it was a really favourable matchup. Toby Green, I'm one of only 5 coaches that have got him there. He got a 58. So I was originally worried about Toby Green, but at the moment I'm not, because everyone else's F6 is going poorly. Even a Brad Hill, who I know you were keen on with this run of Marvel games, he dropped a 56 in his milestone game, which you would have thought maybe would have gone big. So all these forwards are just dropping poor scores. The only really one that I'd feel safer about is a Mason Wood, who at 768 new DPP, 106 last week, but did have 7 scoring shots there, but it could have been a lot bigger. Kicked 3 goals for. So he'd be about the only one that I'd probably feel comfortable going to if you're going to trade someone there. But any other one, it's sort of almost a lucky dip. Sort of put your hand in, whichever one you take out is what you'll get, and then you might get a good score. And obviously there are some good players that got good runs, like a Ben Keys, maybe.
709.
Massive score. Charlie Curnow / Harry Mackay, probably Charlie Curnow at the moment, just with the, I think he's got favourable matchups rest of the year, and Mackay does as well. So you could look at one of those two. And I think
Simpkin,
Mackay could go okay moving forward because he'll be the second ruck now. He'll be with De Koning out now. Pittner will come in. Mackay will be the guy that relieves. So a few extra points there. But yeah, it's sort of, do you want to touch it? If you've got, maybe this is probably one I'd ask you. If you didn't have a Dowling or a Manor at F7, to be able to loop, would that be something where you consider going a forward? Because I think a lot of us have got one of those two. You're happy to loop. But if you didn't, would that be where you'd trade your F6 to try and get someone?
Look, potentially. I think the only reason I'd really trade an F6 is on kind of 2 key variables. One, you don't have one of the top 4. And there is a number of coaches that don't have Heaney, that traded out of him to get that extra score a couple of weeks ago when he missed the week. And so, if you don't own Heaney, you don't own Caldwell, you don't own Flanders, you don't own Zorko. Outside trading out of Heaney a fortnight ago, you probably have had some pain this year without having many of those 4, certainly over the last couple of months since Caldwell's really turned it on. If you don't have that, you're not really trading your F6, but you're trading the guy probably at your F6 to get that. So I'd be okay with that. The other would be if it's the creative way to free up cash, because the F6 you have, you're like, oh man, it could be a 50-point swing and it doesn't really matter. So that's where you're like, would I normally trade into a Ben Keys? Look, probably not, despite him being, I think, like the 3rd or 4th most informed forward at the moment. But if it's like, man, you're a Jackson owner, you need that extra 20, 30K to get the upgrade you want somewhere else. Well, do you want to just get rid of it dead weight and throw a red dot on your team, or you want to keep that cash spinning of a Taylor, a Manor, a Friese, or whoever, yeah, stuff it. Then I'd be a little bit more okay with it if it's more the net combined rather than anything else. But really, I just don't trust any forwards, as you've mentioned there. Like a Simpkin had a stinker last week with a 60, but the next 3 weeks for inside mids are really positive matchups for North Melbourne. And with him playing sort of 50% centre bounce, 50% half forward, man, he's as likely as anybody is to be able to pop an 85-95 over the next couple of weeks. So I just don't think it's worth using your trade investment. I'd much rather do, as you've mentioned, going, man, where are the ceilings coming? The 130s, the 140s, the 150s, that outside of that top 4 forwards, I don't think anyone's capable of doing that. I know Membry just got a 150 on. I understand that. But in terms of people you're trading into with seriousness, I just don't say I'd rather run the gauntlet with improving my ruck, run the gauntlet of improving my M8, see if I can get that designated kicker Whitfield-like score that's popped. I'd rather try to get the ceiling there than maybe make up 10 points on my opponent at F6. I just don't think it's a worthwhile trade unless it's to get one of the big 4 or the net combined kind of combination of stuff. So, yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it's worth the trade. But what might be worth the trade is jumping off of some players and onto some players that have either got some hot streaks that we're going to forecast that are coming. That could be based on injury and opportunity, could be fixture, could be a little bit of the famous Bails gut feel that might be able to get us there. And then I also want to look at some players that you would be looking to jump off. And again, gut feel, fixture, injuries, potential tags, whatever it is that's going to come through there. We've both got 3 players. There is a world of probabilities. We've got the same 3 players for each. So we don't give you 6 options. We might only give you 3 of each. So we'll see how we go. But let's go through your 3 players that you'd be saying, MJ, if I could trade into this guy at some point in the next 5 weeks. It doesn't just have to be this week. It could be in 2 weeks' time. You'll have a run of games that they've got. So that's the premise of what we're going for. Players over the next 5 weeks that you want to trade into, that you believe have got a hot streak. Tell us who they are and when you'd be looking to jump onto them, Bails. Who's your hot streak players?
Yeah, so I guess the ones that are highly owned that I like, that I'll just quickly rattle off because most people have got them. Unless you're an idiot like me and don't have him in a Harry Sheasel. I think Harry Sheasel's the guy that would be great run rest of the year. Talk about it with LDU. He's gone 2 scores of 134 in his last 3. Against Sydney was the only other one in between. Tough matchup, but now he's got great matchups. He would be a guy. There are a few guys like that. Like I even think like a guy like an Errol Goulden. He's got Port Adelaide there, but every other game outside that Port game is pretty nice. But most people have got him. So there's a few guys like that. But in terms of guys that are fairly, I guess, unique, that have got a good run, I like Tim Taranto. I mentioned obviously him before with the mid targets. It's obviously, do you trade into a player that's just had a concussion? He wasn't sort of like, I guess, badly concussed. So that might be the thing that is a little bit easy, a little bit better. He's got Collingwood this week. Obviously, great matchup. Then he goes into the fixtures. He's got North Melbourne. I know I've been tricky, but I still think Taranto would go well. He's then got Saints, Hawthorn, and Gold Coast to finish. And every game is in Melbourne. He's got 3 at the G, 2 at Marvel in his last 5. Obviously mentioned with Walsh. Obviously, if his back's okay, he's got a good run after this week. Same with Noah Anderson. So they're probably the ones there that I've sort of highlighted for me, because I feel like at the moment we did say we're not touching pretty much not touching it. Most people aren't touching their forwards. Most people's rucks outside of the Nankin, the Koning owners aren't touching their rucks for the most part. It's mainly defense.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check you have the tickets in your wallet first before you drive 2 hours to the big game. Seriously, you had one job. Now the closest you'll get to the 50-yard line is parking lot D. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
It's in midfield that people are looking at. I think midfield's almost the one where you're looking at the fixture runs at the moment, because defenders, most people have got, Whitfield, your Nick Martins, your
Dacos.
guys like that. I want to touch on Dacos when it comes to potential trade outs.
I like that. But, good shout.
Yeah, a few guys like that. So defense is almost settled, maybe D6, D5. Maybe you do something a bit different, but midfield is the one I think where you're probably looking at. So they're probably the guys. And even as you said, LDU is a smoky pick, a bit cheaper. Could be a guy with a good run. Could be someone. So they'd probably be the guys I'd be looking at, I reckon.
Nice. I got 3. You mentioned one of mine just right at the end there. So happy to double down on my Luke Davies Uniac, 825K, 6% owned overall. No one in the top 100 has him. So again, if you're either competing for the top 100 or in your case, as you mentioned earlier, man, if I get a couple of variables go my way, I could crack the top 100. Players like this are going to create separation. Next 3 weeks are Geelong, Richmond, and West Coast. They are the 6th, the 4th, and the easiest opponents based off the past 5 weeks of scoring for inside mids. In his last 2 against Geelong, he's averaging 106. In his last 2 against the Tigers, he's gone 111. And his last 3 against the Eagles, he's gone 108. So positive kind of ceiling elements around him and positive recency scoring history as well as recent scoring options for us. So LDU sits in the package for me. But one that I'm not into this week at all, you could do it this week, and there's a world where it's positive and the world where it's a pain point for you. But for me, it would be from around 21 onwards. I'd be desperate to get into this guy. And if doing it this week because you're a Dawson owner, hypothetically speaking, this is the only way you could get there, I'm not opposed to it. And it's Noah Anderson, 893K. Look, a Lions matchup is hard this week for him. But he's got some decent history against the Lions. There's some tons
and
there.
It is at home as well, who we know we've heard obviously everywhere he's the number 1 rated player in terms of when they play at home. I think in the competition, which is quite frightening. Whether Brisbane look at that and go, oh, well, I'd imagine they do look at that and they go, oh, maybe we need to put a berry on him. But Brisbane haven't run a tag. So it's a bit like the Serong one last week. Do you tag?
Do you do that or not?
So,
yeah, I think he's had 7 games at People's First this year, and he's got an average of 122 there for the season. So absolutely crazy. He's in 2% of the top 100. So again, you're looking for unique for separation or creating that. He's there. But from round 21 is when I'd be desperate for it. The Suns have the best inside midfield run over the final 4 weeks of the year. So good news for Flanders owners looking for that. They've got the Eagles after this week of Lions. They've got Essendon, Melbourne, and Richmond. They're all really favourable or just favourable matchups through there. And he's got that ceiling that's really important that we've talked about a few times. 154, 142, and 140s he's already put up this year for us. So Noah's right in the mix for me, honestly. If you had to do it this week, you're running the gauntlet a little bit, but hoping, as Bails mentioned, that People's First kind of just goes in his favour stadium performance. And if you can pop that, then wow, what a final 5 weeks. The other one for me is pure smoky territory, but is absolutely someone that I think could absolutely tear it up for you if you want to go unique in your back line. He's under 800K, albeit by 2K. Last 3 weeks, he's gone at 104 with a couple of 110 plus scores, unowned in the top 100 and 6% ownership. All right. Let me tell you, he is listed as a general defender. He's got St Kilda this week up, which is a plus 16 matchup. He could absolutely tear it apart. Fremantle the week after, which is a plus 3 matchup. Gold Coast Suns, another plus 6 matchup for defenders. And then Sydney, which is actually a really good matchup for general defenders at the moment based off the past 5 weeks. It's Jordan Ridley. It is absolutely out of the box for you. But if you're like, MJ, I just need ceiling, I need favourable matchups. You want to get off by the last week of the year, no problem at all with that. But geez, if for 4 weeks you could pop a 110 average at D6 and he's unique for you in your matchups or your rankings push, I really like Ridley. Like of all of them, Anderson's my favourite for ceiling. LDU, there's a special place in my heart for him, despite him burning me at numerous times over the past 3 years. But Ridley's the defender for me that if you want ceiling and unique, like that could be really interesting to me. So that's good. We've got different players, which is nice.
Just really, I don't mind, but I can hear people in a group chat, saying MJ shush, because they were saying about it. I think one guy in the group chat said, oh, Ridley. And then everyone's like, yeah, stop talking now. I don't
Sorry.
want everyone knowing.
Sorry about that.
That's funny. There's other three defenders actually. I'll just quickly rattle off because I like their runs to finish here because I probably didn't really touch on any. Is the Saints boys, Sinclair and the Sidewinder man. We talked about them in depth a bit last week. So you probably want that in-depth discussion. Let's back to that one. Still very relevant. Yeah. But yeah, Sinclair obviously with the ceiling as well is I like him there. And he had a poor one last week. He's got another bad matchup this week. But after that is Nick Newman. I feel like he could be a guy that finishes the last 4 weeks well. He's got Collingwood, Hawthorn, West Coast, and then St Kilda in the final week. So I know West Coast is considered a tricky matchup for defenders, but I feel like that game could be just a last quarter. They're up by a lot and just chipping around just to get through. So yeah, Newman one to, I guess, put on the sort of notebook there because he's quite unique as well.
Yeah, I love that shout. Newman's got to be in that conversation for ceiling defenders for sure. Well, to wrap up the episode, let's look at the other end of the scale. And you've teased one already, as have I. I liked the one you were heading towards for us of 3 players that you could consider jumping off. Again, it could be fixture, it could be ownership, it could be tags, it could be the famous Bails gut feel, or just something else that doesn't sit quite right for you. So this isn't saying you should trade out of these players, by the way, but these are players you would strongly look at trading out based on luxury season of trades. Who are the 3 guys you've got? I'm waiting for the outrage to hit in the fantasy community, mate. Let's see how it goes.
So the first one I'll start with, and again, this is pure luxury in terms of trades. I'll start off with the one I did tease earlier, which was a Nick Dacos. And you're not doing it this week. He's got Richmond this week. Jack Graham's not going to be there. I think he's still a week away on the injury report, unless something miracle happens in 2 days, he recovers. He's got 4 tags incoming, and at least 3 of them are pretty much guaranteed to be going to him. So Richmond this week, he got Carlton the week after. Shinkoda is almost like odds money on of going to Dacos then. So he's got, and Carlton already restrictive matchup as it is, right? So that's not going to be great. Goes into Sydney at the SCG. Sydney have tagged Dacos in every game they've played against him, and they've got now 3 guys. Any of them could go Adams, Jordan, or Rowbottom. Then they got Brisbane. This is the one team that have decided to potentially not tag him or whatever. A Berry could potentially do a job or something there on him, but that's probably the one where there's ever going to be a game you could get away with it because he did score a 101 against them earlier in the year. Then he finished off with Melbourne, who Neil Bullen, the only time he's really tagged the last sort of couple of months has been on a Nick Dacos, and they made a plan to do that. So those 4 matchups and potentially just at least 3 of them are really scary. So I'd be trading him because he's so highly owned. You might be able to bring in a Nick Newman next week, who we talked about, or someone like that, and goes big in the last 4 weeks. The other one that isn't probably as urgent, and I guess the rucks, and this guy can score well in any matchups. Tim English would be one you could consider this week moving, just because he's got Grundy into Max Gawn into O'Brien, who is a bit neutral. He played really well the other night, so if he's playing like that, it might be a lot more tougher to score on. Then Tristan Cherry, and then Kieran Briggs, who we know has been a bit more trickier to finish up. So that's a few tougher matchups to come. And then probably the other sort of players I'd look at trading out probably almost after this week, and it's luxuries, is those those Freo guys in a Jordan Clark and a Luke Ryan, because they got West Coast this week, which they might score well in, but then they got Essendon, Geelong, but Giants and Port, those last 2 rounds scare me. And we've seen the shift of Freo's game style. It's not as much of this chipping around. It's more just even with like 4 minutes to go in the game, they're up by a lot against Melbourne. They want to kick as many goals as possible. So I don't think the ceiling will be there for either of Ryan or Clark, even though Ryan can hit a ceiling at any point. I just think that there are so many defenders we mentioned before that have got good runs. Midfielders, if you can do DPP switching, have got good runs for the final 4 weeks, not just like 2 or 3. So they're probably the ones that stick out to mind for me as the ones that you could look at moving on, I reckon.
I like that. And importantly, some of these names, in terms of the heavy ownership in that top 100 or high ownership in leagues too. So potentially this is where that benefit for you can come is if, yes, trading out of these highly owned or highly desired players historically goes your way, man, you're getting off a poor score and getting on a good one just in one move. it could be 100-point separation. And without your captain or vice captain having to pop anything crazy, that could be the difference in either ranking, getting top 100, top 1,000, or winning a critical league matchup. So I think you've given us some nice names to consider. Let me throw 3 more in there. One is unlikely to be highly owned based on ownership, but I'll put him in the mix. And then other 2 might sit in that slightly more jarring names, but I like to put them in the mix anyway. One that I would want to be jumping off immediately would be Rory Laird at 895,000. There's a number of reasons for it. One is fixture, which we'll talk about. The second is he is carrying a little niggle off the back of that injury last weekend. It's why he ended up going forward. And I'm not trying to take away credit from Matthew Nicks, but that was why Ben Keys moved into the midfield. It wasn't he's got a hot hand and pushed him up for his first CBAs of the year, but rather it was, man, no Dawson, no Keys, jump in the mid, son. And so that's why Ben Keys was there. And then the other that you mentioned is Matt Crouch is listed as a test. And while I doubt very much he'll come back this week for the Hawthorn matchup, just another variable change into that Crows midfield is enough for me to jump off. The main driver, though, for me is the fixture. It's not pretty. 3 of the next 5 are horrible. He's got the hardest matchup for inside mids this week against Hawthorn, and the 4 hardest mids to score against are Hawthorn, Freo, Port, and Sydney. Crows have 3 of those, and only 1 good matchup in Geelong. So, geez, I just don't want any part of the Crows midfield now with that fixture.
Trading Rory Laird, that's it's cutting deep, that one.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
If someone say trade Josh Kelly, that's the.
Oh, don't even. No. If you're watching the video, like literally, you just watch the soul leave Bails as we had this conversation. Just devastated that I would share this news in front of him. But he's a great fantasy player. Just don't think the next 5 weeks is going to go to him. The other 2 are a little bit more highly owned, probably a little bit more controversial takes. One's owned by 99% of the top 100, 47% overall, and at 900K. Tom Green after this week. This week, it's a good matchup. The reason I mentioned, this is their 4 last weeks. They got the Hawks after this week. Hardest matchup for inside mids. I expect Connor Nash to also do a similar sort of role that we saw Nash do on Sarong a few weeks ago. Then it's the Lions.
Last couple of games as well.
Yeah, exactly. Lions, they're just pretty negligible for top 5 hardest to score against the Lions. Then they got the Dockers, who are the second hardest to score against. And then there is a bit of respite with the Dogs, which is a relatively neutral matchup. But after this coming week of round 20, 2 of the next 4 are the top 2 hardest matchups for inside mid. So I'd probably want to jump off that, not just for that reason, but also, man, it creates great separation in that top 100. And Bales has given us a couple of guys that have got great ceiling. Imagine doing a Green to an Anderson type move, make a little bit of money. You go from one of the hardest inside mid matchups to one of the easiest. There's no guarantees, but the fixture and form indicates it's there. The other one for me I'd consider jumping off would be Zach Butters. I know he's one of the most formed mids at the moment.
That should have been one I said as well. Yeah.
Yeah, like 57% of the top 100. He's got potentially back-to-back tags the next couple of weeks with Chincotta and Jordan. Sydney, regardless, if they don't put Jordan on him and they put, as you mentioned, an Anderson, Adams or a Rowbottom or anyone goes near, they're the 3rd hardest matchup for inside mids. And then in that really important final week of the year, it's the Dockers, which on paper are the number 2 hardest inside mids
over at Optus
matchup and over at Optus too. So for me, there's just enough things about Zach that I'd be like, ooh, a couple of tags, a couple on tough paper matchups. Like all it takes is one more snap and he'll get suspended. Like, I feel like the gauntlet is pretty close to running at an end with Zach.
Even with Butters as well, Melbourne, if Neil Bullen decides to tag again, there's that. And then the showdown, round 23. And you would fully well know as well, just these showdowns, there's not many. They're not high-scoring fantasy games either. You might have a couple that go over 100, but there's normally probably max 4 tons. And like the only one I can remember where there was a lot was, I think, when either side has had a thrashing, when a lot of players get involved. But most of the showdowns of the last even few years have been quite close. So that's, another one that could be not a great score. So, I like that one with trade out of Butters.
Yeah, no, it's good. So there you go. So there's a couple of guys that we're saying, look, on paper, looks a little challenging. tread with caution. Of course, it could go absolutely belly up just because the fixture and the form, as we talked about with Serong, are leading indicators. It doesn't mean it's the defining one, but definitely those are a couple of players that both Bails and I have that think are in a hot stretch at the moment that we might want to get onto in the next couple of weeks, and those that maybe an early exit from our team might well be worth a look at. Hey, before we go, Bails, want to get a quick update on how the finals is looking for the Content Creators Cup. The 3 coaches panel members in the Content Creators Cup, but none making the top 8 this year. Mini Monk, I think, missing out on percentage this year. It was really, really tight, unfortunately, for him. But if you haven't been keeping an eye on it, make sure you do great work in supporting some of the stuff that Guesty's doing with Infinite Wealth. They help you make smarter financial decisions. And still, there is a free gift valued at almost $3,000. It's available for every single AFL fantasy coach. It is at infinitewealth.com.au/AFL fantasy to claim yours and find out more details. I've also got the details in the description of this episode. So if you've been hearing about this great opportunity that Guesty and the team at AFL Fantasy Fanatics are giving, get involved, because there's only about a month left for you to be able to claim that. But I know you yourself have got a pretty critical matchup this week in the Content Creators Cup. Tell us who the finalists are and the matchups, and then I want to hear your prediction for who you think will win the Content Creators Cup in 2024 now that we're down to 8.
Yeah, so nervous week. I would just say, though, quickly, obviously, with what you said as well, people might hear the $3,000 just go, oh, that's just too good to be true, isn't it? There's no way they're offering $3,000. Tim, as my phone goes while we're doing that, Tim offers this, what he's offering with this free gift, clients that aren't AFL fantasy coaches pay $3,000 for this course.
Yeah. I just MailChimped my marketing.
You MailChimped your what?
I MailChimped my marketing with AI to create an effective marketing campaign in minutes.
No, MailChimp and Way.
Yes, MailChimp and Way. Now I can hyper-personalize my campaigns across email and SMS.
You can do all that with MailChimp.
What did I just MailChimp and say?
MailChimp your marketing with the #1 AI-powered email marketing and automation platform, Intuit MailChimp. #1 based on publicly available data on competitors' customers. Plans vary. SMS available as add-ons. Visit MailChimp.com.
So, like, this is legit fantasy coaches who wants to help us all out as a community. So, yeah, make sure you guys do check it out. So, it is really, really good stuff there. In terms of the matchups this week, it was funny enough. The previous week, there are a lot of matchups that determine the 8. Like the top 2 in Mitch and myself. Thankfully, it didn't matter what happened for us. We were first and second was already done. So, we didn't have anything to worry about. But you had, unfortunately, Mini Monk going down just to Luke, and Luke kept his spot in the 8, and Mini Monk, did miss out on points scored, unfortunately. Then he had Nathan beating Mitch by 3 points. He snuck into the 8. So he won his last 7 or something, so I'm a bit nervous about Nathan now as the informed coach. Warney beat Roy, knocking Roy out of the top 4. Warney going to 4th and getting the double chance. So, like, there was just so much movement in this final week as well. And a few coaches just got really unlucky. But in terms of the matchups this week, you got the 2 qualifying finals. So you got Mitch, who finished first on the ladder, up against Warney, who finished 4th. So double chance for Warney. Be interesting to see what happens there. I'm up against Jep in the second qualifying final. I'm hoping, because Jep's away at the moment overseas, Europe. Hopefully,
just bad internet.
Too much bad internet. Yeah, exactly. So get the win hopefully there. Then you got Roy's up against the informed Nathan there. So who knows? Roy out of the top 4 has to play Nathan. Does that? The unfortunate loss in the final week, does that knock him out after potentially having double chance? Who knows? And then you got DC from Hat Chats up against Luke from the Ball Boys. So they're the 4 ones there. Predictions in terms of who I think will win. I think any of these 8 coaches can win.
Get off the fence, Bails. Come on, I'll channel my inner Rids.
Yeah. Yeah. Most people say this might be cocky, right?
I like it.
I'm gonna I backed myself in this year in terms of trades. I've gone, okay, I'm not gonna say with this person with their trades I'm gonna do this. So I'm gonna back myself in because that's worked for me this year. So I'm gonna go myself. If it's not me, it's a bit hard pressed to go past last year's winner in Mitch, who's obviously currently ranked 6th as well, going for a car at the same time as well. So he'd be my pick if it's not myself. But obviously the hope is I win it. And obviously the winner of this money goes to a great cause with all the coaches picking charities for the winning money. So, yeah, it'll be really, really good to see who wins. It'd be Bit of a nervous wait for just myself.
We will be cheering you on, my friend, with no coaches panelists sitting in the finals, unfortunately, this year. We'll have to attach ourselves, but maybe you probably don't want that bad luck attached to anybody. So just let us know who you'd like us to cheer on, and we'll see how he goes. Hey, mate, it's been a pleasure chatting now 2 weeks in a row with you on the coaches panel and getting some of your thoughts. I know our listeners are the same. Greatly appreciate your insight. Where can we keep in touch with you across social media and also the AFL Fantasy Fanatics?
Yeah, so you can follow me at Bails DT across all the socials there to keep up with me across those. Then at AFL Fantasy Fans on X or Twitter or whatever people call it. I still call it Twitter. And then Fantasy Fanatics on YouTube. Content there's daily. We got heaps of stuff. There's my own videos I do, but then we've got our podcast on the Sunday night review show, Tuesday night live Q&A, which we live just shortly after recording this, and then Friday the pre-lockout chat that we do answering everyone's sort of questions once people are panicking with team changes or late changes or whatever. We're live for an hour, about an hour and a half before the bounce of the ball on the Friday night. So if you want to check us out, we're there. But MJ, appreciate it. Love coming on to chat some fantasy, and looking forward to another good week, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. So with final 5 weeks of the year, whether it's leagues or it's rankings, we hope that some of the stuff you've heard throughout this episode has been able to help you navigate the very important trades and captaincy, vice captaincy decisions you are going to be making heading into this week. If any of those links and places that you heard Bails mention just before, you're like, oh, what was that? Don't worry. All the details for that are in the description of this episode. In that is also where you can find the Infinite Wealth kit that is available for the AFL Fantasy fans. The link is for there where you can get in touch with us and become part of our Patreon. And also you can find all the links and details to get in touch with the coaches panel. We wish you well. Round 20, it could be an absolute season-defining one for you. We hope it is kind to you. We'll be back with you next week talking all things AFL Fantasy.